Hey, Civics scholars, we are going to go through the Constitution outline of some of the topics and stuff as we prepare for the test. So, bear with me as we get going here. And I'm going to make sure I got this going on. Perfect. Just FYI, this is going over the study guide for the test. Pay attention, follow along, add some things in if you need to, and make sure that thing gets turned into me before the test comes on, either Monday for your odd classes or Tuesday for even classes. Also note, if you hear some background noise, sorry, I got boys watching football in the other room, and I've got a daughter watching some baking kids show or something like that right next to me on YouTube TV. So if some wacky stuff's going on in the background, I apologize. But hey, that's life at the Carlson household. It's all good. So I'm going to kind of add some things in here as we go. First and foremost, why did the colonists come to the United States? Hey, we don't need to cover that for the test necessarily, but they were seeking, we'll just put various freedoms from places that they were coming over from Europe for: religious freedom, economic freedom, things like that. What country did the colonists want freedom from? Now, that's when we were colonists here. That would be Great Britain. Or if you want to say England, that's fine, although they're not necessarily exactly the same thing. They felt they were being mistreated and did not have any representation in the government. And that's the government in Great Britain. So how did the Declaration of Independence originate? We're going to skip over that one too, because we can go right down to this one. What are the functions of the Declaration of Independence? Well, one, to declare independence. Oops. And two, to let the world know their complaints against the British. All right, what about the Articles of Confederation? Why didn't they work? Well, first of all, they were the first written government of the U.S. Why didn't they work? Okay, let's talk about that. One, it had a weak central government. Two, central government did not have the power to tax. Three, lack of federal government currency. Remember, each state had their own currency, which made for an economic mess. Yeah, sorry, that's my daughter barking in the background. And four, we talked about there was a lack of ability to raise a military. Kirsten, be quiet. Shh. Those are some of the main reasons that it didn't work. So remember, then we get rid of the Articles of Confederation. We meet at the Constitutional Convention. Kirsten. We meet at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and a couple of these things happen. So it says, what happened at the Constitutional Convention? The delegates from the 13 states decided to write a new government, and I'll put in the parentheses the Constitution. And the following plans. So we get the New Jersey plan. That was where the small states, remember, wanted smaller states wanted the legislative branch. which I'll put, remember that's Congress, to all, one of the legislative branch to be set up based on all states receiving equal representation. Then we also had the Virginia Plan. Larger states wanted the legislative branch, let's put LB, to be set up based on the population of the individual states. From there, then they had to compromise, right? So we get the Great Compromise. Where they decide that the legislative branch would have 2 houses. The Senate, I'll put equal rep for equal representation. Remember, everybody gets 2 in the House of Representatives based on population. And that's what we have today. And that's stuck around for those 230 years that we've had the Constitution. All right, next up here. How are slaves to be counted? So that was that next compromise. So now we took care of the kind of the disagreement in Congress between the large states and the small states. Now we got an issue, though, because one of the pieces, the House of Representatives, is based on the population. We now need to figure out how we're going to take care of slaves and how they're going to be counted. So remember, we came up with a 3/5 compromise. Each slave would be counted as 3/5 of a person, or for every 5 slaves that a state had, they could count 3 towards their population. All right, let's move down to the Constitution then. What are some of the basic principles of the Constitution? Describe the following. So let's start with federalism. That is where there are different layers of government. Remember, we've got then the federal government. We've got state or regional. And we've also got local. So that'd be like cities or counties. The purpose of the preamble to the Constitution is basically it states the purpose of the Constitution. What are the topics of each of the articles of the Constitution? There's 7 different articles that start out the Constitution before it gets into the amendments. We don't need to know about all 7 of them right now. Just know that Article number 1 sets up the legislative branch. 2 sets up the executive branch. And 3 sets up the judicial branch. How can the Constitution be changed? Remember, there are 2 methods we talked about the other day in class. One is that an amendment must pass both the Senate and the House of Reps with a 2/3 vote. Then, if that happens, each state legislature, each state Congress must pass the amendment not each state. Then 3/4 of the state legislatures must pass the amendment. The second way is that a constitutional convention must be called and the amendment must pass with a similar process. The first method is really the one we want to be most familiar with. That's the one. We just need to know that the Constitution is able to be changed. It's just not an easy process. It's a very difficult process for the Constitution to be changed. What? I'll get you Sprite in a little bit. Ask Mom. Yes, she is. Mom! All right, we'll have to keep going over my daughter. She needs some Sprite. All right. What is the Bill of Rights and what's the purpose of it? Remember, that's the first 10 amendments. And their purpose is to protect citizens. She's fine. Protect citizens from who? From the government. The First Amendment, remember those 5 things in the First Amendment, which I think we know most of those. But here, this question asks, what are the 2 clauses of the First Amendment that deal with the freedom of religion? Be able to describe them. Remember, first we've got I don't need those bullets. The free exercise clause. Citizens can exercise. Remember, exercise, just they can perform, they can do any religion or none at all. And 2 was the establishment clause, which says that the government cannot establish a religion. I think one of the court cases that we talked about with that was Engel versus Vitale. I'll put that on there. One of you had that as your First Amendment case that you presented to the class. Those where they had prayer being read in schools in the state of New York, and people said, no, you can't do that because that establishes a religion. Let's see here. How does separationists? You know what, guys? We're not going to cover that. We took that piece off of the test, so I'm just going to put we used to be able to put like a dash mark through there. Forget it. We don't need that one. First Amendment, freedom of speech. What are 3 types of speech? So let's talk about 1. We've got pure speech that we talked about. Pure speech is going to be more like just verbal speech. Then we've got symbolic speech, and that's things like symbols. Obviously not like symbols in a band, but things that you display, symbols or actions. So the Tinker versus Des Moines, when those high school kids wore that armband to school to protest the Vietnam War that was going on, that would be considered symbolic speech. The symbol. They weren't saying anything, they weren't speeching anything, but they were symbolizing, or they were using an action, and the symbol was those black armbands to kind of say what they were believing. And the third one that we probably want to be familiar with a little bit is going to be argumentative speech. And argumentative speech, that's like persuasive speech. Persuasive oops, there we go. Or giving one's opinion. How can speech be limited? Be able to describe each of the limits on freedom of speech. Really, the two main things that we want to talk about. Okay, libel and slander, right? Libel was, well, I don't know why that happened like that. That's like written speech. Slander being spoken speech. Spoken speech. That kind of sounds funny. The fighting words. Anything spoken. I'm going to say speeched. I know that's not right, but like anything spoken. Oh my gosh, the girl behind me. Anything speeched, so said or typed or whatever, disseminated out that may cause violence, gas, fire in a. Sorry if you can hear my daughter in the background. Yeah, we can't do those kind of things there with the fighting words, right? How did the court case Tinker versus Des Moines affect schools? The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the students and made the precedent that just because students are at school doesn't mean they give up all of their First Amendment rights. So here's that time when the students were backed up by the court. And as we've spoken about some other things that have happened, and we will hear in just a few minutes, other times the courts have ruled that the schools can take away some of our rights that we have, or for students at least at schools. Okay, let's move on to the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure. What is the purpose of the Fourth Amendment? To protect citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. The definition of search and seizure, we'll put law enforcement's examination. Of what I write here. Personal property to find evidence. Probable cause, that is the amount of evidence that evidence, or I'm trying to think of a better word to say that with, the amount of evidence / belief based on facts that law enforcement must have to obtain a warrant for, I'm just going to put S and S, search and seizure. The Exclusionary Rule states that any evidence gathered illegally cannot be used against someone charged with a crime, and that's the person we call the defendant. And I'll put the court case on there. That was that map versus Ohio, where the lady was supposed to have that bomb stuff in her house, bomb making stuff, and some of the illegal gambling stuff in her house. Police barge in without a legal warrant. They have an illegal warrant. Okay, the two exceptions that we probably need to be familiar with to needing a warrant for the law enforcement to search our stuff and our property. We talked about being plain view, right? Where the law enforcement can see evidence in plain view. And the other one would be consent. When law enforcement is given I'll just put the okay from a citizen to search. What was the court case, New Jersey versus TLO, about? High school girl smoking in bathroom. Assistant principal checks her, I'll just put her belongings. I'm not sure if it was a backpack or her purse. Her belongings, and finds marijuana. I don't even know how to spell marijuana. That's probably a good thing, right? Marijuana. Like some rolling papers that I guess you use for marijuana for smoking. Rolling papers. Significant amount of money, and list of people who owe me money. And she claims that she shouldn't have been searched because there wasn't probable cause. Yet the courts ruled that no, they could search her stuff because it's at a school and because they had reasonable suspicion. So that's where it gets set up that in a school, like, you guys kind of lose some of those Fourth Amendment rights about search and seizure, that the school officials only need reasonable suspicion, as opposed to, had this happened to this girl like across the street from Zealand East at the family fair or whatever, they would need that probable cause. They need a little bit more concrete evidence, which is what probable cause is. So the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause, reasonable suspicion is less evidence than I'll just put PC, probable cause. How's the court case, Verona versus, okay, we took that court case off the test, so don't worry about that one. Fifth Amendment, be able to define the following terms. So grand jury.
Mom, I need my Sprite.
That is a jury that is put together to determine if there is enough evidence for a trial to take place. And remember, they're not in charge of determining innocence or guilt. They're just in charge of deciding whether, again, there's enough evidence for a trial to even happen. Second, eminent domain, ED, that is where the government can take private property as long as they give just compensation, or they pay you whatever they took is worth. Double jeopardy, cannot be charged with the same crime twice. And then self-incrimination, that's where no one needs to basically, if you're asked to call and testify in court, you don't need to go up in front of the court and answer all the questions if you don't want to. You have to go up there, but you can just say, remember, I plead the fifth. So no one needs to testify against themselves. I plead the fifth. Now, don't use this if you get home late at night after your parents tell you to be home, and they ask you, "Well, did you get home late?" And you did. Don't say, "I plead the fifth," because that's not going to fly at home. How did the court case Gideon versus Wainwright change legal precedent? It allowed, or I don't say allowed, it gave all people. And in this particular case, they focused on the difference between him and like poor people. He gave all people, poor people included, the right to counsel, or what we'd say a lawyer. What? Cool. Lawyer, attorney. The Eighth Amendment, and just a little bit here. I got to change this. I would say there are three provisions to the Eighth Amendment. The first being no excessive bail, or that's the amount of money that a judge might set for somebody to pay so that they don't have to wait in jail for their trial to happen. Two, no excessive fines. You steal that pack of gum from, not that any of you ever would, but from the gas station across the street at Family Fair there, a judge can't say, okay, your punishment is going to be $100,000. Like, that's pretty excessive. Maybe you'll get fined $250 or something like that. And the last one would be no cruel and unusual punishment. And that's where we lead into the death penalty stuff. But I would say we changed a little bit on the test, so don't worry about methods of punishment. We talked about in that article that I read with the death penalty debate, most of the 27 states that still use the death penalty, I think all but Nebraska use the lethal injection. And that's, even as we were reading about, is being challenged as possibly cruel and unusual because of the way that's administered sometimes. But that's kind of up for debate, how people feel about that. Hey, hopefully that helps you out. If you have any questions or anything like that, email me, Google Classroom. If you don't have the test till Tuesday, you've got time during advisory that you can come see me on Monday, or just any time throughout the day Monday. Same thing if you have the test Tuesday afternoon. Get a hold of me Tuesday morning. Let me know if you have any questions. We will spend a few minutes at the beginning of class talking about anything that you guys need to go over. And I'm looking at the test right here just to give you guys a heads up, maybe to calm your fears a little bit. But there is a writing portion on the test that I talked about. The topic of the writing, basically the question that you have to write about, is should the Supreme Court continue to allow random drug testing in schools? And you're going to be asked to write a letter to the school newspaper about your thoughts and feelings on that, because the Supreme Court has ruled that random drug testing in schools is okay. And there's some information on the test there that you'll be given that can help you out with your answer. But again, the question will be, should the Supreme Court continue to allow random drug testing in schools? All right, Civics scholars, hey, have a great rest of the weekend. Make sure you get this study guide done and complete if you want some credit for it. And then I'll be collecting those come class on, the next time I'm with you guys. For you odd classes, it'll be on Monday. Even classes will be Tuesday. See ya. Is that live or were you recording?